Aviation is one of humanity's greatest achievements.
After takeoff,
Every day, thousands of aircraft take to the skies, connecting people, cultures, and continents. It's a marvel of engineering and precision, and statistically, one of the safest ways to travel. Yet, despite this safety, history has witnessed tragic crashes that made headlines on national TV stations and shocked the entire world.
Breaking news now. We're getting reports of a plane crash in India.
On board, one of the helicopters involved in the SeaWorld tragedy.
Moments before US Airways Flight 1549.
But within some of these devastating moments, there were miraculous stories of survival.
One of the two survivors is now sharing his experience.
Sole survivor of the crash
Both of those survivors were rescued from the tail section of
In this video, we'll revisit some of the most catastrophic accidents in aviation history that, against all odds, ended with survivors. But before we dive in, take a moment to subscribe, like, comment, and share, so you never miss more incredible stories. Now, let's get into today's events. Aloha Airlines Flight 243. On April 28, 1988, passengers of Aloha Airlines Flight 243 boarded a routine flight from Hilo to Honolulu in Hawaii. It was meant to be a short, 35-minute island hop, the kind of trip many locals had taken countless times before. On board were 90 passengers and 5 crew members, preparing for what seemed like an ordinary journey. The aircraft was a 19-year-old Boeing 737-200, a workhorse that had completed tens of thousands of flights in the humid, salty Hawaiian environment. Unknown to those boarding, years of metal fatigue and corrosion were about to trigger one of aviation's most terrifying incidents. 23 minutes into the flight, at 24,000 feet, disaster struck. Deafening bang, a huge section of the fuselage roof tore away, from just behind the cockpit all the way past the first set of seats. In an instant, the cabin was exposed to the open sky. The force of the decompression was so violent that flight attendant Clarabelle C.B. Lansing, who was standing near the ruptured section, was blown out of the aircraft. Tragically, she was never recovered. Inside, chaos unfolded. The aircraft was shaking violently, the controls were unstable, and the roar of the wind made communication nearly impossible. At 1:58 p.m., just over 30 minutes after takeoff, Flight 243 landed safely on Maui. The plane's tires burst on impact, and the aircraft skidded down the runway, but it came to a stop in one piece. Emergency crews rushed to the scene, expecting to find mass casualties. Instead, they discovered what could only be described as a miracle: all 89 passengers and 4 crew members had survived. Air India Flight 171. It was the early morning of June 12, 2025 at Sardar Vallabhai Patel International Airport in Ahmedabad, India. Air India Flight 171, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, was preparing for its journey to London Gatwick. On board were 236 passengers and 6 crew members, a mix of families, students, and business travelers. At 5:30 a.m. the jet lifted off into the dark sky. For the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. But then, just minutes after takeoff, something went terribly wrong. An alarm sounded, and the pilots declared a mayday to air traffic control.
Mayday, 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 this is...
The Dreamliner began turning back toward Ahmedabad. Witnesses on the ground later reported seeing flames trailing from one of the engines.
Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Catherine Biarahanga, and I just want to bring you some breaking news now. We're getting reports of a plane crash in India. An Air India flight taking off from Ahmedabad International Airport crashed shortly after takeoff.
Within moments, firefighters, paramedics, and police rushed to the scene. What they found was devastating: twisted wreckage, burning debris, and no signs of life. But as they combed through the site, a miracle emerged. Beneath the wreckage, they discovered a man alive, injured, burned, but conscious.
Sole survivor of the crash, who is a British national of Indian origin, is in the civil hospital of Meghaninagar, Ahmedabad. TN India correspondent spoke to him a short while ago. Take a listen.
Did you manage to escape?
He was Vishwash Kumar Ramesh, a 40-year-old British citizen. Rescuers carefully carried him away from the wreckage and rushed him to a nearby hospital, the sole survivor of Air India Flight 171.
So, did the aircraft catch fire before you came out?
Yes.
US Airways Flight 1549. On January 15, 2009, at New York's LaGuardia Airport. US Airways Flight 1549, an Airbus A320, was preparing for its short hop to Charlotte, North Carolina. On board were 150 passengers and 5 crew members, including Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger and First Officer Jeffrey Skiles. At 3:25 p.m. the aircraft was cleared for takeoff from runway 4. It accelerated down the runway and climbed into the sky over the city. Barely 2 minutes into the flight, disaster struck. At about 3,000 feet, the A320 flew directly into a flock of large Canada geese. The sound of multiple impacts shook the aircraft, and almost instantly, both engines lost thrust. Captain Sully and First Officer Skiles immediately took action. They tried to restart the engines, nothing worked. Air traffic control cleared them to return to LaGuardia, but Sully quickly realized they wouldn't make it since there was no power to run the aircraft. Sullenberger aligned the powerless jet with the Hudson River, keeping the wings level and nose slightly up. At 3:31 p.m. just over 3 minutes after the bird strike, Flight 1549 touched down on the icy river in what is now called the Miracle on the Hudson. The plane skipped once, then settled gently on the water, still intact. An incident that made history in national TV stations.
Last moments before US Airways Flight 1549 ditched in the Hudson River. On tapes, you can hear the pilot radioing that they've hit birds, a flock of birds, and the rush is on to find a safe place to land. Let's get right to NBC's Tom Costello. He's been
a commercial aircraft, a US Airways flight from New York to Charlotte, lands in the Hudson River in New York City.
Everyone moved quickly onto the wings and into life rafts as the aircraft slowly filled with water. Within minutes, ferry boats, police, and fire rescue teams converged on the scene. Miraculously, all 155 people survived. Jeju Air Flight 7C-2216. On December 29, 2024, at Suvarnabhumi Airport in Bangkok, passengers quietly boarded Jeju Air Flight 7C-2216, a Boeing 737-800 bound for Muan International Airport in southwestern South Korea. It was a routine end to holiday travels. Families and friends were eager to return home. Approaching Muan just before 9 a.m. the flight received landing clearance for runway 01. But 3 minutes later, air traffic control issued a troubling warning: bird activity in the area. Minutes later the cockpit reported a bird strike as pilots aborted the landing. Instead of executing a standard go-around, the aircraft sharply turned to approach runway 19 from the opposite direction. At approximately 9:02 a.m. the jet touched down, but with a terrifying difference: landing gear had not deployed. The plane belly landed, skidding along the runway as witnessed by the local.
A bird strike and a possible contributing factor to the crash.
The aircraft crashed through a navigational structure and concrete embankment at the end of the runway. A fierce fireball erupted, engulfing the plane in flames. Within 13 minutes of the crash, authorities declared a Level 3 emergency, dispatching over 80 firefighters and more than 30 fire engines to the scene. Firefighters battled the blaze for 43 harrowing minutes before finally containing it. Amid the inferno, amazingly, 2 cabin crew members were found alive in the tail section, which had detached and remained intact.
Both of those survivors were rescued from the tail section of the plane, which you can see behind me. Now, South Korea is carrying out 5 days of safety checks and...
First, a 33-year-old male flight attendant was found standing, in shock. Then, about 30 minutes later, rescuers used hydraulic tools to lift debris and free the 25-year-old female attendant, who was conscious and able to speak. Both were rushed to hospital, treated for moderate to severe injuries but very much alive. PA Flight PK 8303. It was May 22, 2020, at Allama Iqbal International Airport in Lahore, Pakistan. PIA Flight PK 8303, an Airbus A320, was preparing for a routine domestic flight to Karachi. On board were 91 passengers and 8 crew members. Families, business travelers, and people heading home for the upcoming Eid holiday took their seats as the aircraft pushed back for departure. The flight took off just after 1 p.m., climbing smoothly into clear skies. For most of the journey, everything appeared completely normal. Passengers settled in, unaware of the disaster that was about to unfold. At around 2:30 p.m. Flight PK 8303 approached Jinnah International Airport in Karachi. But as the Airbus descended, something critical went wrong. Instead of lowering the landing gear, the aircraft attempted to land with its wheels still retracted. The engines scraped violently against the runway, sending sparks and smoke trailing behind the jet. Realizing the mistake, the pilots powered up and attempted a go-around. But by then, the engines had suffered severe damage. As the A320 circled for another attempt, both engines failed completely. The pilots radioed, "We have lost engines."
That, sir, we have lost engines. Clear, mayday, 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 Pakistan 8303.
With no power left, the jet began gliding toward Karachi's dense residential neighborhoods. At 2:45 p.m. the aircraft crashed into the crowded model colony area, just short of the runway. Buildings erupted in flames as the wreckage tore through the streets.
Oh my God!
Within minutes, rescue teams, firefighters, and local residents rushed into the smoke and debris, pulling survivors and tending to the injured.
Mayor of Karachi initially said,
Miraculously, 2 passengers, a bank executive and an engineer, were found alive among the wreckage.
Pharma sued the CEO of a bank.
Badly injured but conscious, they were carried away from the crash site and rushed to hospital. Out of the 99 people on board, only 2 survived. PIA Flight PK 8303 became one of the deadliest air disasters in Pakistan's history, remembered for both its tragedy and its extraordinary survivors.
On board survived, including the president of a Pakistani bank, Zafar Masood, and this man, named as Mohammed Zubair.
2023 Gold Coast mid-air collision. It was just after 2 p.m. on January 2, 2023, a bright summer afternoon on Australia's Gold Coast. At the popular SeaWorld heliport, tourists boarded 2 separate sightseeing helicopters for short flights over the beaches and ocean. Families, friends, and children buckled in, excited to see the coast from above. Both helicopters, Eurocopter EC-130S, lifted off within minutes of each other. One was beginning its climb, carrying 7 people on board. The other was returning to land, with 6 people inside. The sky was clear, visibility was excellent, nothing to suggest danger. But at 2 p.m. as one helicopter rose and the other descended, their paths tragically crossed. The 2 aircraft collided mid-air just above the sandbanks near Main Beach. One helicopter's rotor blades tore into the other's cockpit. The aircraft returning to land managed a hard emergency landing, damaged but largely intact. The other, mortally struck, plunged onto a sandbar in a violent crash.
Moment of impact, as seen by those on board one of the helicopters involved in the SeaWorld tragedy. Moments into the video, a chilling realisation from a passenger in the back as the second helicopter comes into view.
A moment of impact caught on camera. Even more terrifying, they saw it coming. As the pilot approaches SeaWorld, you can see the second helicopter taking off. A male passenger in the back seat spots it and points. He reaches forward, frantically trying to warn the pilot, but it's too late. All he can do is brace. The impact smashing the windscreen, ripping open the front of the helicopter, the pilot somehow managing to land safely. The collision sending the other helicopter to the ground.
Beachgoers, boaters, and nearby staff rushed toward the wreckage before emergency crews even arrived. Within minutes, police, paramedics, and surf lifesavers were on scene. The impact had been devastating. 4 people lost their lives instantly, including the pilot. But 9 others survived, some with serious injuries. Survivors were pulled from the wreckage, treated at the scene, and rushed by ambulance and helicopter to nearby hospitals. The collision shocked Australia and the world. Thanks to the swift actions of rescuers and bystanders, many lives were saved. Aeromexico Connect Flight 2431. It's July 31, 2018, at Durango International Airport in Mexico. Passengers board Aeromexico Connect Flight 2431, an Embraer ERJ-190AR, bound for Mexico City. There are 99 passengers and 4 crew on board. Excitement, chatter, families getting settled in, a routine afternoon flight. A slight delay happens when a fuel leak is noticed in one engine. Technicians check it out, eventually giving the aircraft clearance. At about 3:14 p.m. the plane taxis toward runway 03. Storm clouds are gathering. Rain begins. At 3:21 p.m. despite deteriorating weather, the flight is cleared for takeoff. Winds at first are manageable, headwinds. Visibility is dropping. The tower's view of the runway becomes difficult. A severe weather advisory is issued by meteorological services, but due to power issues, it doesn't reach the tower controller. The aircraft accelerates down the runway. At about 147 knots, the pilot rotates and lifts off, raising the landing gear just 2 feet above the runway. But then things start to go wrong. Wind shifts, turning from a crosswind into a strong tailwind. Gusts isolate the aircraft, airspeed drops, altitude falters. An alarm sounds in the cockpit. 5 seconds after the warning, the left wing strikes the runway. Both engines shear off. The aircraft skids off the end of the runway, coming to rest roughly 300 meters beyond. The fuselage begins to break apart. Smoke, then fire. Inside, the cabin crew move fast. Emergency slides are deployed. Passengers begin evacuating, some through the main exits, some through gaps in the wreckage. Everyone is out within about 90 seconds after stopping. Just minutes after evacuation, fire trucks and rescue teams arrive. Smoke and flames envelop the aircraft. First responders help the injured out, guiding people away from flames and wreckage. Some passengers are badly shaken, others carry burns or other injuries. In total, 39 people suffer serious or minor injuries. Importantly, all 103 on board survived. Qantas Flight 32, Airbus A380. November 4, 2010. Singapore's Changi Airport. Passengers boarded Qantas Flight 32, an Airbus A380 named Nancy Bird Walton. On board were 469 people, families, business travelers, cabin crew, and 5 experienced pilots. Their destination, Sydney, Australia. The largest passenger jet in the world, lifting gracefully into a clear morning sky. For everyone on board, it was meant to be just another long, routine flight. But only 4 minutes after takeoff, as the aircraft climbed above Batam Island, it happened. A sudden, deafening explosion ripped through the left side of the jet. Passengers looked out of the windows in shock. Flames, smoke, and torn metal trailed behind the wing. Inside the cockpit, chaos. Engine number 2 had exploded, tearing itself apart. Shrapnel tore through the wing. Fuel lines, hydraulics, electrical systems, all damaged at once. One by one, warning alarms filled the flight deck. Hydraulic failures. Electrical failures. Flight control warnings. Fuel imbalances. Engine shutdowns. So many alarms, the crew couldn't silence them all. At the controls sat Captain Richard de Crespigny and his team of highly skilled pilots. They knew the aircraft was still flyable, but badly crippled. They began running through emergency checklists, assessing which systems were still working. Their Airbus, once the pinnacle of modern aviation, had become one of the most complex emergencies ever faced in civil aviation. The crew placed the jet into a wide holding pattern, circling Singapore for nearly an hour. They worked through failure after failure, testing controls, calculating fuel, and carefully planning an approach. All while passengers sat silently, staring out at a shredded wing and leaking fuel. At last, the crew prepared to land. But even this would not be simple. The aircraft was well over maximum landing weight. Several flap and slat systems were damaged, brakes were compromised, and one engine refused to shut down. Everyone in the cockpit knew this would be one of the hardest landings of their lives. As the A380 descended toward Chinese runway, tension filled the cabin. The jet touched down hard. The strain burst 4 tires. The damaged brakes struggled to slow the aircraft. Yet, against all odds, the aircraft stayed on the runway. As the giant Airbus A380 touched down, the cockpit crew fought desperately to slow it. With damaged brakes, failed thrust reversers, and limited controls, every second was a battle. The massive jet roared down the runway, smoke rising from the tires, until finally just near the end it came to a grinding halt. It came to a stop. Rescue vehicles rushed forward. Firefighters surrounded the aircraft, spraying foam onto hot brakes and leaking fuel. One stubborn engine kept running for almost an hour, refusing to shut down, until crews finally drowned it in fire suppressant. Inside, passengers clung to each other, realizing just how close they had come to disaster. And yet, every single one of the 469 souls on board had survived. Qantas Flight 32 would go down in history as one of aviation's greatest near-misses, a flight where an unthinkable failure met extraordinary skill, and where calm teamwork in the cockpit saved hundreds of lives. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found the story both powerful and inspiring. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a like, share it with your friends, and most importantly, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story.